But now let's talk about deadweight loss. So surplus is the net benefit that everybody gets. The demand curve measures the benefits. The supply curve, this one here, measures the cost of production. So the surplus is between the demand curve and the supply curve. So remember, this is not like a new supply curve. It's just the supply curve with the tax. So the surplus is the difference between the benefits and the cost of production here. And that net benefit would be maximized at the market equilibrium. But we're not there anymore because the tax has made the price go up, which means consumers buy less. So the tax made the price go up. We now have this new higher price and smaller quantity. So we're going to not get this part of the surplus anymore. So deadweight loss, just like in the other examples we went through. All right. Okay, so the tax is inefficient because it prevents mutually beneficial transactions. So between the QT and Q star, let's just label those on this diagram. So this one's the QT, 20, whereas 25 would have been efficient. So between those two quantities, the benefit to the consumers is bigger than the cost of production. So there is a potential net benefit or surplus for these units here, but we're not getting them because the tax has made the price more expensive, and then the consumers are not willing to buy those extra units. Okay, so between the quantity QT and Q star, the consumer's willingness to pay is greater than the marginal cost, but the units are not being purchased because the tax raises the price. Okay, so what happens then is we get deadweight loss. All right, so deadweight loss, I'll put in orange. Now, consumer surplus. Okay, so consumer surplus, no, wait a minute. No, I'm going to do that at the bottom. Sorry. Okay, we'll do that on the other graph. So first we'll just do total surplus, which is just going to be whatever's left here between the demand curve and the supply curve. Okay, we'll do consumer surplus on the other diagram. There we go. Okay, so this whole area would be total surplus, and then the little one, deadweight loss. Okay, so now we'll break out the total surplus though and see who gets what. Starting with consumers. Okay, so consumers are paying this price here. Remember, consumer surplus is the net benefit. It's the difference between the benefit they get and the price they pay. So this demand curve tells us the benefit they get from the goods. This is the price they pay. So here will be consumer surplus, the triangle above PC. For the producers, surplus is a net benefit again, so it's the difference between the price they get paid and what their cost of production is. So the price they get paid is the producer price, and their cost of production is the supply curve, the original supply curve. Okay, so that will be the producer surplus. Who gets this? Who gets that money there? The government, yeah, so that would be tax revenue. and then our little triangle there, which will be the deadweight loss. Oh, that's hard to read. I'll label it as well like this, deadweight loss. Okay, so that would be the orange part. All right, so the total surplus is these three areas. Okay, so the government tax revenue is included in total surplus because even though that is money that's being taken away from consumers and producers, it's still money that belongs to the society. And then the government will hopefully do good things with the money, like build bridges and hospitals and things like that that people need. Okay, so the total surplus is the entire area here, the entire trapezoid area. So total surplus includes consumer surplus, producer surplus, and tax revenue. Any questions? Okay. All right. Now, last thing here is, so the consumers are worse off and the producers are worse off. And in a sense then, they both pay the tax. Now, when we think about paying the tax, you think, okay, I have to give the store the tax money and then they give it to the government. But what we can see has happened is that compared to the equilibrium, the consumers are paying more, but then the producers are also getting paid less. So both consumers and producers then pay the tax. In this example, it's equally divided. They each get a $10 difference. It's a $20 tax. But it doesn't have to be equal. Sometimes the consumers pay more, sometimes the producers pay more. We'll talk more about that in the following chapters after the midterm. Okay, so this is called the tax incidence. All right, so consumers are now paying $10 more. So we have a consumer's tax burden or consumer tax incidence, which is how much more they're paying. So the consumer price now is 60, and the price they used to pay was only 50, so they're now paying $10 more, and then to get the total, so I'll put, so 60 minus 50, and then now the total number of shoes they're buying is 20, so that means they're paying a total of $200. Oh, this thing shuts off. Well, there we go. Okay. For the producers, they get to keep $10 less than before. So they used to get P star 50, now they only get 40. So they used to get 50, now they only get 40, and they're selling 20 units, and so they lose $200. And so notice that the two areas combined would be the total tax revenue. So consumer incidence and producer incidence equals tax revenue, which was $400. Good. Okay, so let's show these areas, the two tax incidence areas in the graph. So the consumer incidence is the extra amount they're paying compared to before when the price was 50. So it's a rectangle. So that will be the consumer incidence. And then the producer incidence is the other rectangle, the difference between the price they used to get, which was 50, and the price they now get, which is only 40. Okay. Okay, on the next page, we are going to talk about the difference between a tax and if there is simply a decrease in supply, because the graph looks pretty much the same, but it's not. Good. All right. So a tax versus a decrease in supply. Okay, so let's do the decrease in supply first. Now, a decrease in supply could be caused by, we went through 6 different things in Chapter 3, like fewer suppliers, or a change in expectations about the future price, or change in current events, weather, lots of different reasons. Okay, so for example here, the cost of labor increases. All right, now there's no tax here, no tax. So the original total surplus would be at the triangle up to the original equilibrium between the benefit to the consumer and the original cost of production. So this would be the total surplus before. And now, because the costs have gone up, then the surplus will decrease. Remember, the surplus is the difference between the benefit to the consumer and the cost of production. So as soon as that cost of production goes up, then the surplus will get smaller. So we're at this new equilibrium here, and the surplus will be between the demand curve and the new supply curve. So in the market, there will be a decrease in total surplus, which is the difference between the pink triangle and the purple triangle. And the difference between the two triangles will then be this area here. So this is not the same as having a deadweight loss. This is not the same as having a deadweight loss. Because a deadweight loss is when there's a potential for people to become better off by buying and selling, but for some reason they're not allowed to, right? So if I want to buy something from you and you want to sell it to me and we've agreed on a price that makes us both better off, but then something stops us from doing that, that's called deadweight loss. And that would be seen in the diagram as a quantity where the demand price is still bigger than the supply price. But here, the costs have gone up. Now, people are worse off, but it's for a different reason. People are worse off because the costs have gone up. So what that would be instead is, let's say I want to buy from you and you want to sell, but now your cost has gone up. So let's say I want to buy and I'm willing to pay $10. You were willing to sell because your cost was, say, only 8, but now your cost is 12. So are we going to trade? Now we can't. Your cost is 12. I'm only willing to pay 10. That's just not going to happen then. That's not deadweight loss, though. That's not deadweight loss, because now the cost is bigger than the benefit, and it's just not efficient to trade. It's just not going to work out. So it's like too bad, but it's just not going to work out. So that's what's happened here then. So you've got consumers, say for these loss of units here, the consumers were willing to pay this price and the cost used to be here, so they were getting surplus and they were buying and selling those units. But now the cost is up here. So for these units, here's the benefit and here's the cost. It's just not going to work out. They're just not going to buy and sell those units anymore. So now they only buy and sell up to Q2. Okay. All right, so total surplus decreases, but the market is still in equilibrium, so there is no deadweight loss. A tax is different, though. So for a tax, Now first, well, I'll use the same color here. So first, before there was a tax, then the market had the maximum amount of surplus. But now there is a tax, but the cost of production has not gone up. The cost of production is still here. The problem with the tax is that it raises the price and then consumers buy less. And so now the surplus only goes up to here. The surplus is still between the demand curve and the cost of production, but it only goes up to this new quantity here. So here's our new total surplus, which does not include that little triangle. So that is the deadweight loss. Thanks. Well, let's color it right in, make it clear. Yeah. Okay, so the two events kind of look alike because you've got the two supply curves, but here the loss of surplus is here, the change in total surplus, whereas here the loss of surplus is just the deadweight loss. Good. Okay. Any questions? Yeah.
For questions with a tax, will we be given like what the tax is?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So if I ask you a question about a tax, where you had to calculate it, for example, or graph it, it would be like the example we've just gone through. Like I'd give you the information there. Yeah. Or you might have a table like that. Yeah. All right. Okay, so let's finish up with the last example. And then, okay, so we'll do this and then you guys can have a break. All right, so we have a demand function and a supply function and the tax. Okay, so first thing is to figure out what is the new function for the ST curve. And what we do is we add the tax to the supply function. All right, so okay, so our new function will be 20 plus 1.5Q. Okay, and we're going to graph it on the next page. But before we graph it, let's do some of the calculations. So first, the before tax equilibrium. So that's just using the demand function and the original supply function. And we'll calculate the price too. Okay, and then we'll calculate the tax equilibrium. So that's using the demand curve and this new supply curve, that ST curve. And now we have to calculate two prices though, because there's the consumer price and the producer price, the price the producers get to keep. So we'll start with the consumer price. So using the demand function, 50 minus 2.5 times Q, which is 7.5. So she got 31.25. And then the producer price, which you can get either by taking this minus the tax, so this minus $10, or use the original supply function. So I'll do that, 10 plus 1.5 times the quantity. Okay, but you get the same answer. Okay, so now we can graph it. Okay, and so then we've got all the numbers we need to do the calculations. All right, so consumer surplus first, so that's between the willingness to pay and the price they're paying, 31.25. So that's a triangle. Producer surplus is the triangle between the price they get paid now, which is only 21.25, and their cost of production. Now I'm going to add the other numbers here. So when you're doing calculations, it's up to you how many numbers you want to keep after the decimal. Usually if you're giving a final answer, you can just round up and just leave 2 numbers after the decimal. That's fine. I'll just put them there just. Okay, tax revenue. So tax revenue is going to be the rectangle between and so that's just the tax, which is $10 times the quantity, 7.5. So it'll be 75. And then total surplus is the 3 of them combined. So we just add them together. Or, so I put or here because when you want to calculate total surplus, you can also use the formula for a trapezoid and just calculate the full trapezoid area here. So if we do it that way, height 1 will be 40, right? 50 minus 10. And height 2 is just the tax, right? So for height 2, you will always know that the difference between these 2 supply curves here is the tax, which is $10. So plus 10, and then times QT times half. Okay, but you should get the same answer, 187.5. All right, deadweight loss. So for deadweight loss, it's the area of the triangle here. Now the height is the tax, right? The height is the tax. It's the difference between this price and this price. So the height is the tax, and then times the width, which is 2.5. So 10 times 2.5 divided by 2. And then last thing, consumer incidence and producer incidence, and that's where we're dividing up the tax revenue. So the top rectangle is the consumer incidence, so I'll just put CI, and then the bottom one is the producer incidence, I'll put PI. Okay. So for the consumer incidence, the height of the rectangle is 31.25 minus 25, the original price before the tax. And then times the QT. And then the producer incidence, the height of that rectangle is 25 minus the price they get now, 21.25. Times the quantity.